What if ancient Israel was not always strictly monotheistic? What if the roots of the Hebrew faith were shaped by a world of many gods, El, Baal, Asherah, and Yahweh, before the belief in one God took center stage? In this video, we dive deep into archaeology, ancient texts, and hidden traditions to uncover whether Israel once worshipped more than one deity. Was Yahweh alone from the beginning, or did he rise above others to claim the throne of Israel's faith? Join us as we explore the forgotten past of Israel's gods and the journey from many to one. The story of Israel's religion is usually told as a simple one. The people of God worshipped Yahweh, the one true God, while the surrounding nations worshipped false idols. This picture, however, is the product of centuries of theological editing, reinterpretation, and rewriting. When we look at archaeology, ancient texts, and even the Bible itself with a critical eye, a far more complex story emerges. One where Israel's early faith was not always strictly monotheistic. Instead, Israel began within a world of many gods, where Yahweh was one among several deities. Over time, through struggle, reform, and redefinition, Israel's religion transformed into the radical monotheism we know today. To ask, did Israel worship more than one God, is to touch one of the deepest questions in biblical history. The answer is not a simple yes or no. It is a journey across centuries of evolving belief. The world of ancient gods. To understand Israel's faith, we first need to place it in context. The land of Canaan, where Israel emerged, was not a spiritual vacuum. It was a crossroads of civilizations where Egyptians, Mesopotamians, and local Canaanites all brought their gods. The Canaanite pantheon was led by El, the high god and father of the divine council. With him were deities such as Baal, the storm and fertility god, Asherah, the mother goddess, Anat, the warrior goddess, and many others. This pantheon reflected the cycles of nature, fertility, war, and kingship that shaped daily life. Israel's earliest religion did not begin outside this context. It grew within it. The very name Israel means El rules or El persists, tying the nation's identity to the Canaanite high god. Yahweh enters the stage. So where does Yahweh come in? Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that Yahweh was not originally a Canaanite god. Instead, his earliest worship seems connected to regions in the south, near Edom, Midian, and Sinai. Ancient poems, such as in Deuteronomy 33 verse 2 and Judges 5 verse 4, describe Yahweh coming from Seir, Paran, and Teman, all areas outside Canaan proper. This suggests Yahweh was first a regional deity, likely a storm warrior god associated with desert tribes. His rise to prominence within Israel was not immediate. Instead, he gradually entered the Canaanite religious landscape and began absorbing roles previously held by El and Baal. The early blending, El and Yahweh. One of the most striking shifts in Israel's religion is the merging of El and Yahweh. In the earliest biblical traditions, El is clearly distinguished as a separate figure. For example, in Genesis 14, Abraham is blessed by El Elyon, God Most High, a title known from Canaanite religion. Similarly, names like Israel, Ishmael, Elijah, and Bethel all carry the divine element El. Over time, however, Yahweh began to be identified with El. By the time of the Exodus story and the formation of Israel's tribal confederation, Yahweh had absorbed El's roles as creator, king, and father. The Bible retroactively attributes El's titles to Yahweh. El Elyon, El Shaddai, and El Olam are all applied to Yahweh. This merging was one of the first steps toward consolidating Israel's religion under a single deity. The rivalry with Baal. If El was absorbed, Baal became a rival. The storm god Baal was the most popular deity in Canaanite religion, worshipped as the bringer of rain, fertility, and agricultural prosperity. Baal's myths, his battle with Mot, death, and his resurrection, were central to Canaanite seasonal rituals. Biblical narratives reflect this rivalry. Stories of Elijah on Mount Carmel, 1 Kings 18, and Hosea's condemnation of Baal worship show how deeply entrenched Baal devotion was in Israel. Archaeological finds, such as inscriptions and altars, confirm that many Israelites worshipped Baal alongside Yahweh. Rather than proving strict monotheism, these texts reveal the opposite. Israelite prophets and reformers were constantly fighting against polytheistic practices among their own people. The need to condemn Baal so forcefully shows that his worship was widespread and persistent. The forgotten goddess, Asherah. Perhaps the most surprising discovery of the past century has been the role of Asherah in Israel's early religion. Asherah, the Canaanite mother goddess and consort of El, appears in inscriptions found at sites such as Kuntalat Adrud and Khirbet El-Kam, dating to the 8th century BCE. These inscriptions include blessings that mention Yahweh and his Asherah. What does this mean? Scholars debate whether Asherah here refers to the goddess herself or a cultic object, like a sacred tree or pole, associated with her. Either way, it is clear that some Israelites believed Yahweh had a divine consort, much like El had Asherah in Canaanite tradition. Even the Bible hints at this. In 2 Kings 23, King Josiah destroys the Asherah pole in the Temple of Jerusalem, showing that Asherah was worshipped within Yahweh's sanctuary itself. Later editors condemned this as idolatry, but the evidence suggests that for centuries, many Israelites saw no conflict in worshiping both Yahweh and Asherah. Polytheism in the Bible itself. It may surprise modern readers, but the Bible itself contains passages that suggest a belief in multiple gods. For example, Psalm 82 depicts God Elohim standing in the council of gods, judging them. This reflects the old divine council imagery, where El presided over lesser deities. Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9 in the Dead Sea Scrolls version says that Elion divided the nations among the sons of God, and Yahweh received Israel as his portion. This implies Yahweh was one God among many, assigned a specific people. Exodus 15 verse 11 asks, "Who is like you among the gods, O Yahweh?" A rhetorical question that assumes other gods existed. Only in later redactions do these texts get reinterpreted to fit a strict monotheistic framework, from polytheism to monolatry. By the time of the prophets, 8th to 6th centuries BCE, Israel's religion was in transition. Most Israelites were not monotheists in the modern sense. They were monolatrists, meaning they acknowledged the existence of many gods, but were called to worship only one, Yahweh. This explains why the 10 Commandments begin with, "You shall have no other gods before me." It does not deny the existence of other gods. It forbids their worship by Israel. The prophets constantly reminded the people to remain faithful to Yahweh alone, which would not have been necessary if strict monotheism were already the norm. The crisis of the exile. The Babylonian exile, 6th century BCE, was the turning point. With Jerusalem destroyed and the temple in ruins, the Israelites faced a crisis of faith. Why had Yahweh, their God, allowed them to be conquered? Out of this crisis came a theological revolution. The exilic and post-exilic prophets, especially Deutero-Isaiah, Isaiah 40 to 55, proclaimed a new vision. Yahweh was not merely Israel's God, nor one among many. He was the only God in existence. Passages like Isaiah 45 verse 5 declare, "I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God." This was the birth of true monotheism. Over time, Jewish scribes reinterpreted older traditions, edited scriptures, and reshaped Israel's history to present Yahweh as the one and only God from the very beginning. The work of redactors. The Hebrew Bible, as we have it, was not written in one sitting. It was compiled and edited across centuries. The editors, writing in the monotheistic age, reshaped earlier polytheistic or henotheistic traditions to align with their theology. Stories of patriarchs meeting El were reinterpreted as encounters with Yahweh. Ancient psalms referring to multiple gods were reframed as poetic language. References to Asherah were systematically condemned or erased. What remained, however, are enough traces and contradictions to suggest the older layers of Israel's faith. The redactors preserved history, but through a monotheistic lens. Why it matters. The question of Israel's many gods. The question of whether Israel once worshipped more than one God is not just an obscure detail of ancient history. It strikes at the very heart of how religion develops, how Scripture is shaped, and how we understand the foundations of monotheism itself. For billions of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, the idea of one God, unique, eternal, and without rival, is central to their identity. Yet, the historical evidence strongly suggests that ancient Israel did not always hold this view. Instead, like its neighbors, Israel began with polytheistic traditions, gradually shifting toward monotheism through centuries of conflict, reform, and reinterpretation. Why does this matter? It matters because it forces us to reconsider how religious truths emerge. It matters because it reveals the human dimension in the making of the sacred. And it matters because it challenges us to see faith not as a frozen monument, but as a living story that grows, adapts, and transforms across time. This essay will explore why Israel's early polytheism and its eventual transformation into monotheism matters for history, theology, and the human search for meaning. Religion as an evolving story. To many, religion is seen as timeless. The truths we inherit from Scripture are presented as fixed and eternal, handed down unchanged from the dawn of revelation. Yet, when we look at the evidence from Israel's past, we see something different. We see that Israel's religion was not a ready-made system, but a developing tradition. Yahweh, who later stood as the eternal, unchanging God of Israel, began as a southern storm warrior deity. His worship was first localized in desert regions like Edom, Seir, and Midian. Over time, Yahweh absorbed the roles of El, the high god of Canaan, took on the cosmic kingship once attributed to Baal, and was even paired with Asherah, the Canaanite mother goddess. This process shows that religion is not static. It adapts. It incorporates older myths, redefines them, and gives them new meaning. That matters because it means the religions we know today, even in their strictest monotheistic form, are the result of long human journeys of reinterpretation. They are not divorced from history, but deeply rooted in it, rewriting the past. Another reason this matters is the way Israel's history was rewritten. When the Hebrew Bible was compiled and edited, its authors lived in a later, monotheistic world. They looked back at centuries of polytheism and reshaped it into a story of one God from the beginning. Abraham is presented as a worshiper of one God, even though his world was full of gods. The Ten Commandments forbid worship of other gods, but later interpreters read this as proof that no other gods existed. Kings and prophets are judged by how exclusively they worshipped Yahweh, casting history as a struggle between truth and error. This rewriting matters because it shows how collective memory is shaped by later beliefs. It demonstrates that Scripture is not a flat record of history, but a layered tradition where earlier polytheistic realities were reframed into monotheistic theology. By recognizing this, we gain a deeper respect for Scripture, not as a simple chronicle, but as a living library where generations wrestled with the meaning of God. The struggle for identity. The shift from polytheism to monotheism was not merely a religious adjustment. It was also a struggle for identity. Israel lived among powerful neighbors, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Canaan, whose gods were deeply established. To distinguish itself, Israel needed more than land and kingship. It needed a unique spiritual identity. That identity crystallized around Yahweh. Prophets like Elijah, Hosea, and Jeremiah thundered against Baal worship, Asherah poles, and foreign gods. Their zeal was not simply theological. It was political and cultural. Exclusive devotion to Yahweh became the marker of what it meant to be Israel. This matters because it shows that monotheism was forged in the crucible of cultural survival. It was not only a belief about the heavens, but also a strategy for defining a people on earth. Religion, in this sense, is never separate from social and political life. The exile as turning point. The Babylonian exile was the decisive moment in this journey. When Jerusalem was destroyed and the temple burned, Israelites faced a crisis. If Yahweh was truly supreme, how could his people be conquered? In response, Israelite thinkers redefined Yahweh's power. He was no longer just the God of Israel's land. He was the God of all nations, the creator of the universe. This radical vision, preserved in 2nd Isaiah, declared, "I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me there is no God." Isaiah 45 verse 5. This matters because it shows how crisis drives religious innovation. Without exile, Yahweh might have remained one God among many. With exile, he became the one and only God. Suffering and loss, paradoxically, gave birth to one of the boldest theological revolutions in human history. Why polytheism persists in memory. Even though later Judaism, Christianity, and Islam became strictly monotheistic, echoes of Israel's polytheistic past remain. In the Bible itself, we find traces of the old divine council, references to Yahweh's Asherah, and stories that only make sense in a polytheistic setting. These echoes matter because they prevent us from flattening the past. They remind us that behind the official narrative lies a more complex reality, and they suggest that even the most absolute truths were once contested, negotiated, and transformed. Recognizing this does not weaken faith, it deepens it. It shows that belief is not brittle, but resilient, able to absorb change and reinterpretation without losing its essence. Implications for theology. For theology, this history raises profound questions. If Israel once worshipped many gods, what does that mean for the idea of revelation? Did God reveal himself gradually, guiding Israel step by step toward monotheism? Or is monotheism purely the product of human cultural development? Different traditions answer differently. Some see the polytheistic evidence as proof that God accommodated Israel's limited understanding, slowly leading them to truth. Others see it as evidence that religion is entirely human-made, with no need for divine intervention. Either way, the question matters because it forces us to wrestle with the relationship between divine truth and human history. Monotheism was not dropped fully formed from heaven. It emerged through centuries of struggle. Whether we view that as divine guidance or human creativity, the journey itself is undeniable. Lessons for today. To how we live with difference and diversity today. Ancient Israel moved from a world of many gods to a faith in one God. That shift created both deep unity and sharp conflict. It gave Israel a strong identity, but also fueled intolerance of other traditions. In our pluralistic world, recognizing Israel's polytheistic past can help us cultivate humility. It reminds us that even the most absolute claims have histories, and that all faiths are shaped by time, culture, and circumstance. It invites dialogue rather than dogmatism, respect rather than rivalry. It also matters for personal faith. Knowing that Israel's religion evolved does not destroy belief, it enriches it. Faith becomes not a denial of history, but a companion to it. Believers can see their traditions not as brittle glass that shatters under scrutiny, but as living trees with deep roots and growing branches. The power of story. At the heart of this question lies the power of story. Israel's story, from many gods to one, has shaped the world. It gave rise to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, traditions that today encompass over half the planet. The story matters because it shows how myths, memories, and reinterpretations can transform entire civilizations. It shows that the line between history and theology is not always clear, and that both can work together to give people hope, identity, and purpose. A mirror for humanity. Finally, this question matters because it holds up a mirror to humanity itself. The shift from polytheism to monotheism is not only Israel's story, it is our story. It reflects the human capacity to change, to reinterpret, and to seek unity in the midst of diversity. Just as Israel once asked, "Who is our God?" so too we ask today, what truths do we hold and how do we live them? The answer is never simple, never final. Like Israel, we are always in process, always rewriting, always moving from many to one, whether that one is God, truth, justice, or meaning. So, did Israel worship more than one God? The evidence is clear. Yes, in its earliest stages, Israel was polytheistic like its neighbors. Yahweh began as a regional deity, merged with El, fought Baal, and even shared space with Asherah. For centuries, many Israelites worshipped multiple gods, despite prophetic calls for exclusivity. Only after the exile did monotheism take its final form, rewriting the past to present Yahweh as the one true God from the beginning. Why does this matter? Because it reveals the living, evolving nature of religion. It shows that faith is not static but dynamic, shaped by history, crisis, and human imagination. It challenges us to see Scripture not as a brittle record, but as a resilient tradition. And it invites us, in our own time, to hold our truths with both conviction and humility. In the end, the story of Israel's many gods matters because it is not only about the past, it is about us. It tells us that belief is a journey, that truth is discovered through struggle, and that the quest for God is as old as complex, and as human as humanity itself. The story of Israel's gods is not just history. It's a window into how faiths evolve, transform, and redefine themselves over time. From El, Baal, and Asherah to the rise of Yahweh as the one true God, this journey reveals the complexity behind the world's most influential religion. Whether you see it as myth, history, or divine plan, the question remains, how did many become one? If you found this exploration thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into ancient mysteries and hidden truths. Until next time, keep questioning and keep seeking.